Joined by my second of three congressmen today. Last hour, Representative Waltz from Florida. Next hour, Representative McCall from Texas. This hour, Representative Walden from Oregon. I want to ask him the same questions. Good morning, Greg. Welcome back to the program.
Hey, good morning. Good morning, Hugh. Good to be with you this morning.
I am sampling Congress people from around the country so I can get an idea of the answer to particular questions. The first one of which is, do you think the Chinese Communist Party of the People's Republic of China owe money damages to people around the world?
Hey, they're no friend of ours. We should have known that a long time ago. And the answer, in short, is yes, whether it's them or the government. And there's no president can figure out how to recoup that better than this one. And with Peter Navarro on the trade side, there's got to be a way.
Well, one way is to simply open the federal courts and strip sovereign immunity from state-sponsored enterprises and the CCP itself.
Well, we know what they've been doing for a long time. If you read Michael Pillsbury's book, The 100-Year Marathon, lays it out.
Book.
He goes clear back. Yep, great book. Kissinger's written a lot on this. I mean, this is obvious to anybody that's been paying attention. Fortunately, President Trump's been paying attention, and a bunch of us have been as well. Especially when it comes to supply chain vulnerability. You think about what happened after the '08 meltdown. We had a company emerge out of China, obviously state-sponsored, called Huawei. It now infects our communications networks. That's why we passed legislation to get it ripped out. We need to fund that. The president signed the bill a month or so ago now. That ought to be done so we can get rid of the vulnerability in our networks. Look at the vulnerability in our drug supply chain, our PPE. Mask gowns, we are crippled as an economy because we don't have enough masks. Are you kidding me? I mean, there's a lot we have to do here to get us on better footing.
All right, the next questions all involve the fact that the states are going to have to approach the federal Congress for money. They are in cardiac arrest in many places, and they don't have any tax revenue. And I've been looking last night at the California situation. It's dire. When you cut off personal income tax, which accounts for, I think, 65% of the general revenue, and state and sales tax, sales and use taxes are another 20%, the state's going to have a fiscal heart attack. So they and everyone else are going to come to the Congress for aid, and you're going to be able to condition that aid on reform.
We should. Yeah, we should. And the first place I'd start is, we pay about 50% of the public health budgets for states so that they're ready in case of a big public health crisis. Guess what we're in? And I think part of the conditioning has to look at how are states not better prepared to deal with this. We're looking at what we didn't get right, so we don't repeat that. But the other piece of this is, look, that's what the money to states was for, was to be ready with a public health system that can respond in a situation like this. And you discovered in California, most of their N95 masks were outdated because the elastic was probably beyond useful time in their own stockpile. We've got stockpile reform issues we're going to implement nationally to make sure that doesn't happen and modernize how we do our national stockpile. But then I look at, private sector. They're cutting jobs, they're furloughing, they're taking pay cuts at the top. All across the map. And states are going to have to think about, can they afford to do everything they've been doing? I was in business 20 years, radio business, my wife. When times were tough, you sucked it up and you made tough decisions and you just had to scale back. I don't see the states doing that yet. They're trying to deal with this pandemic. But I'll tell you what, it's not like we're sitting on a freezer, sub-zero Nancy Pelosi freezer full of cash back here. These printing presses are smoking. They're running so fast, and the debt's going to be on the next generation. So I don't want the states to look at us as a big piggy bank with a never-ending balance.
Well, when they come, and they will come, I talked about it with Leader McConnell yesterday, I think there are two key things that need to happen. The first is that private business needs a federal statute preempting all state law concerning tort liability for COVID-related illness. And that means not that people can't screw up. There could be reckless, wanton negligence of someone down the road for which they ought to be held liable.
That's a different
but
deal.
you've got to preempt the plaintiff's bar from crippling business with class action suits about COVID. And the only way to do that is to federalize it and localize all claims in the Second Circuit or the D.C. Circuit or someplace like that. Do you see that on the agenda to make sure that the plaintiff's bar doesn't pick over the bones of American business at the end of this?
They're salivating. Look, in the CARES Act, if you go to Section 2315, I believe, or 3215, there are liability protections and preemptions dealing with people who are basically first responders, healthcare providers in this situation. It has the carve out, as you said, that if it's willful criminal, that's a different deal. But if you're, Good Samaritan sort of law, we could simply expand that to business. If you're following the protocols, if you're doing the right things, then you ought to have protection here. Look, again, as having been a small business owner for 20 years, you want to take care of your people. You want to do the right thing. Nearly all of us do. If you give me the guidelines, I'll follow the guidelines. Most employers I know would do the same and are doing the same. And so they
But Congressman,
to frivolous.
That's true, but the only way to make that effective, literally the only way, I retired from the law like you're retired from radio, so I have no dog in this fight, but I've had lots of years doing this, and unless you preempt all state law and consolidate all claims in one federal district, the vultures will descend and they will simply blackmail people into paying tribute.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree with you at all, Hugh. I'm in full agreement.
All right, then let's move to the last thing on my list. I discussed it with the leader McConnell yesterday on the air. He caught a lot of heat, headline on Drudge, but it's the only way to go. There is no Chapter 8 in the Bankruptcy Code. There should be one for states that need to reorganize and jettison bad deals and expensive pension obligations and ridiculous contracts and to cut the pay of state employees. Will we get a bankruptcy code chapter that will be a tool that states that are against the wall can use, Congressman?
Well, I think we ought to consider that, absolutely. Why should states like mine, not that it doesn't have some issues, but we have to balance our budget. They work it out one way or another and have been pretty fiscally responsible in most categories, I could argue, in certain areas. But why should my taxpayers bail out states that, have had corrupt governors literally cycling in and out of prisons, that have given away the bank and the store and everything else?
Are we talking about Illinois?
I didn't name names now, Hugh, but come on. That everybody's seen this coming for a long time. For a while, they couldn't even pay their lottery winners. So come on.
You're right, and Connecticut is number 2. Connecticut is right behind, not for corruption, but in terms of indifference to the public fisc. And there's no way we should bail them out without reform.
That's right. That's exactly right. Exactly right.
So who has the lead on this? How does this happen? Because, Nancy Pelosi just wants to write a blank check to the public employee unions. That's what that last 2 weeks have been about.
Well, here's your problem. With Nancy Pelosi as Speaker, you know who has the pen?
Yeah.
Chairman of the Judiciary Committee. And you know who was giving out pens when the president was convening the first coronavirus task force? Nancy Pelosi was giving out pens, the impeachment pens. So Jerry Nadler chairs the Judiciary Committee, right? That's who's going to write.
Good.
You think he's going to do a bankruptcy reform or tort reform? Heavens, no. This is.
Oh, good Lord. So it's got to come from the Senate. Well, that's why I'm educating the public. It's got to come from the Senate, and
there you go.
The president and the leader have to insist on this, and members of the House like you have to make the arguments on the floor.
Yep.
Are there enough Democrats who will actually, the urgency of the state's condition will make them susceptible to these arguments. It's sort of like a borrower who's got to borrow. The terms that are imposed on the loan can be often quite onerous, correct?
That's true, yeah. And I see, that's where I think you condition it. And I think it's responsible to condition. I think it's what taxpayers deserve. Frankly, taxpayers 3 generations out, because you think this debt's going away in the next generation. This is a burden that's going to be borne by our grandkids and beyond. And we've got to get reforms. You have to get reforms. People say, what are you going to do about the deficit and the debt? It's, you think about how it's skyrocketed. We have to bend the spending curve, and that means getting reforms and stop being everybody's piggy bank. You can't.
I don't want to ruin his reputation I don't want to ruin Congressman Jim McGovern's reputation by saying good things about him, but I will say there are some smart Democrats, and Jim McGovern is among them. And can they not combine with the best and the brightest of both houses on the Republican side and the best and the brightest of both houses on the Democratic side and come up with something that works?
I think we have to. Look, there are moments in history, and this is one of them, when you have to stand back and go, okay, what have we gotten right? What have we gotten wrong in this country over a period of time? What do we need to change? And let's go change it. And I think that involves supply chain, whether that, we're having this big war with China over who's going to develop the technology for autonomous vehicles. And guess who's standing in the way of that? The trial bar. We passed it unanimously when I was chairman of the Energy and Commerce Committee. Republicans and Democrats across the committee in the House, sent it over to the Senate, trial bar upends it. And we're stalled ever since. I mean, when you look at some of these other issues, we got to figure out how to produce things here. You look at how China's gobbling up rare earth minerals and everything else around the globe. Look at what they're doing in China, in Africa, what they're trying to do elsewhere. They have a plan. They are focused. They have never relented from that 100-year plan. They're closing.
And
you have to get smart.
They are taking over the nuclear power industry. They own all the enrichment. They're building the plants all over Africa. We are out of the business of enrichment. We are not enriching any uranium in America anymore. None.
That's exactly right. And then online, their agents are some of them putting out the false tests and scams and all that. And so, I mean, they're trying to affect our public opinion. They're trying to seize the world's greatest assets, our natural resources. I know in the West, I don't know what they've been doing directly, but I do know it's almost impossible to do mining. It's almost impossible to do forest management. You look at how our resources, our great natural resources, have been tied up, locked up, shut down, and now we're dependent on somebody else. We've gotten so dependent we can't even get an N95 mask. Now we are through the War Powers Act, or not War Powers Act, Defense Production Act, Procurement Act, that the president's invoked to make companies do this. And now we're waking up and saying, okay, we got to change how we operate. But how did we get to this point?
It's a unique moment in time. I hope the smart people get together, you and Upton and a few other people from the Republicans and McGovern and a few other people from the Democrats, and just be smart. Congressman, thank you for your time. I appreciate it, and good luck.